This video is intended to do two things. One, it's going to demonstrate the use of this modulo or mod operator. So we'll use that in determining whether a number is even or odd. And the other thing I'm going to do in this video is not in this book, but we're going to use something called using the JavaX swing library. And what we're doing here is just giving ourselves, not indented properly, giving ourselves a little bit more graphic dialog box rather than the boring console. So this is optional. You don't have to use this particular one. And in fact, swing is a library that's going away. It's being, there's another library that's becoming more popular. But this is super easy to use, and it's just kind of fun for some of our first programs. So let me just run this first so you can see what the goal is. And then I know this font is real small, but it has to do with this surface that I'm working on. Anyway, there's a little graphical GUI, graphical user interface window that's asking what is your name, and there's a little prompt here that says get username. So I'm going to put in my name so it's similar to us getting information from the console as we've done in our other little applications. Click on OK, and then there's a little message box that gives me that value back, hello, and my first name Kirsten, and then click on OK. And now I'm being asked for a value. I'm going to put in 5. It's saying enter in an integer. I put 5, and all that's being returned is true or false. Is that even or is that odd? And at this point, I'm just going to keep it fairly simple, but let me go over some of those lines of code that is making that those processing happen. Okay, so this is common. We are declaring our variables. Notice that when I'm getting a string variable, I'm using the capital S. This is in fact a class of a string as opposed to what we call primitive values, which are our ints, our floating points, and that kind of a thing. And we'll get more comfortable with what all that means, but for now I'm pushing you off at the deep end and hoping you can tread water. Just get the concepts, the overall concepts. So we've got capital string for getting the result from the user, and then an int of hours, which is from an old program, and I don't need that, so let me delete that. And then int even or odd. So let's look at how that works. In order to utilize the class and methods that enable us to use that graphical interface message box, dialog boxes, we're going to import JOptionPane. JOptionPane is a class that's found within the JavaX library. So we have to import that so that Java knows where to find the code that allows us to create these dialog boxes. So here is a line of code that's using JOptionPane. That's the name of the class that we're going to run. And here is a method. And the method's name is showInputDialogBox. And this method receives 2 arguments. So I have to send it 3 arguments. The first one, null, simply means for now we'll just accept that, and that's just centering the dialog box in the center of our screen. The next argument is a string. It can be a variable if you need it to be, but in this case it's a string, and it's what is the question that's being shown in that dialog box. And then get username was the default that was in the dialog box. So let's just run that again. Oh, why am I getting compile error? I haven't done anything. Oh, I guess I did need int hours. I used it here. So I confused myself. Int hours was needed because I need it here. Okay, so now I should not get a compile error. And there is the box. So what is your name is this first argument, and then get username is that little default value that's supposed to go in there. Hello, null, and it didn't account for the cancel. We'll be doing that later. Okay, so this option pane then is getting that information from that text box, that dialog box, and it's putting whatever the user typed into this variable, which is a string result. Okay? When we get this information from showInputDialogBox, it is returned as a string. So I can't make this an int. I can't make this a double. result has to be a string, and we'll deal with what happens if it's an integer in the next couple of lines. But for now, just realize that if I use this show input dialog and I ask to get a value, that value is going to be returned to me as a data type string, and so I need to make sure that I have that declared as a string data type, which we do. So all is well so far. Because I wanted that to be a string, it was a person's name. And so here where we had show input dialog box, our other method that we can use is show message dialog box, which is simply returning a value. There was no input that was required. And so again, we have null. Go ahead and put that in the center of the window. And then I did a concatenated string where I took the word hello, the string that was returned from the line above, and we just had that little dialog box that returned that back to us. So again, if I run that, this is this show option, show input dialog. It's getting a value. That value, Kirsten, is being returned into result, and then the result is printed out in the following string. And sure enough, that does say, as tiny as it is, hello Kirsten. And then I'm just going to close out of this and continue on. Okay, so let's take this another step further. Let me do this. I'm going to copy this. Let's say hours, which we've said is an integer, is equal to, let's see, let me just get, I'm going to copy and paste to make my life a little bit easier. All right, so this is going to make sense eventually, I hope. Okay, so now what I've said is go ahead and use that show input dialog box again, like we did on line 14, and get a value, enter in an integer. Remember, I told you that that has to return a string, and so I put it into hours, and hours is an integer. So I've got a data type problem. See where our error message says incompatible types, string cannot be converted into an int. So J option pane is returning, the show input dialog is returning a string, and I'm trying to put it into an int, and that's not working. And so our thought is, well, we've seen this casting in prior examples, so I'm just going to cast it as an int, which means that go ahead and take whatever's in this string and make it an integer, and by casting it, it should work in hours. Well, again, I'm getting the same error message. Well, I thought in prior examples you said we could do this. We can do this casting when we're trying to cast numbers. So if I have a float that I'm trying to cast to an int, that's okay. But I can't cast an int out of a string. So since this is a string, I can't use this simple cast. And so that's why I still have this error. So I'm just going to delete this and show you the next line. And in order to cast an int from a string, we need this integer dot parse int. Or if it was a double, it would be double and then parse double. Okay? So this is still giving me an error because hours is an int. It's not a double. So let's put this back into an int, integer. And we'll learn more about this in later chapters very soon. Oops, parse int. But I'm just sort of getting you comfortable with it now in case you play with things and get errors that you don't understand why. But because we're receiving a string from show input, a string can't be cast. We have to use this class and method in order to convert the string into an integer, and therefore now I don't get that error message. So now hours will in fact be an integer. This next line of code is taking hours, and mod 2 says what will be the remainder after hours is divided by 2. So if I put 5, the remainder of 5 divided by 2 is 1. So 1 would go into this particular value. If I put 4, 4 divided by 2 is 0. So the remainder would be 0. So that's how mod works. I'm going to step us through this code in a minute so you can see it working. Let me just explain it first. And then this is a quick and easy way to test the value. So let me just walk us through this code rather than trying to explain this one. So I'm going to click on number 20 so that I can set a breakpoint. This is a way of debugging code. And I'm going to choose from my menu at the very top, Debug and Debug Project, or Control F5. And remember, this allows us to stop our code at a certain point so we can see what our values are or variables are containing before we continue on. We can watch it step by step. And so by putting a breakpoint on line 20, I'm going to run all of these lines of code and then stop on line 20 to see what values they currently hold at this point in time. So I'm still getting this input box because that's here on line 14. I'm going to put in my name, click on OK. Line 17 should run. Hello, Kirsten. Oh, excuse me, that's line 15. Hello, and the result. Line 17 is going to run, enter an integer, and I'm going to put in 5 and click on OK. Line 19 will run, and then the code will stop. So at this point, the green line has not run, and the code has run up to the end of line 19, which means even or odd has a value. So let's look down here. We can see our variables that are at this time, what they are and what data type they are. So we can see that hours is in fact an int and it has the value 5. Remember, we went through all of that work of converting the string into our integer. And then we can look at even or odd. So this value is 1. So we can do things like, besides just see what the values are at this point in time, I can also highlight this equation, so to speak, this evaluation, and see what comes up. And I believe I should get, yep, hours, you can see that it returned 1. So there's another way to see what that equation is. We could put our cursor over it and see that hours is equal to 5. Okay, so this is a nice way to step through our code and see what's happening. Okay, so we know that even or odd has the value of 1. The next thing I'm going to do is, now that we have our code is in debug and it stopped, we have this menu up here. This is our debug menu. The red button obviously is just finish the session. Green would be continue on to the next breakpoint or the end of the line. But I'm going to move over a couple of these until I have this blue box with the orange arrow that's pointing down. And if I hold my mouse over it, says step into or F7. And this is simply going to run the next line of code and then stop. So I'm going to click on that one. You'll see that we've moved, our green line has moved down 1 line. And if we look, we can see that values have now been added. Is even is a Boolean, which is false. So I just want to use this to step through, oh, I didn't mean to keep going. I wanted to use this to step through our code so we can see how that worked. Even or odd, what we're doing is even or odd has the value of 1, which we saw was the remainder. We're testing this to see this is equal, this is a comparison, remember, not an equal. So we're testing to see is even or odd the same as whatever's value in even or odd, is it 0? And the answer to that, of course, is not. It is 1. So since it's 1, this is returning a value of false. Even or odd is 1, 0 is 0, so these are not equivalent. So we're getting a false is returned, and false is what's being put into is even. So when we print out our dialog box at the end and we're printing is even, in this case, we're printing false. Whereas if we had run this again, I'm going to continue the run. Sure enough, there's false. So let's run it again. Debug, debug project. And we enter my name. Hello, Kirsten. Enter an integer. Let's put 6 this time. So 6, hours divided, or excuse me, mod 2 is 0 because 6 divided by 2 is 3 with 0 remainder. So 0 is what's being put into my variable, even or odd. The next line should evaluate is even or odd the same as 0. The answer to that, of course, is true. So true is being put into my Boolean variable is even. And my show dialog box then should print out even, or true, excuse me, which it does. So lots of things going on here. You do not have to use this J option pane, these methods in your code, but it's a fun way to do what we've been doing in a little different way. But this also demonstrates the use of that modulo operator, which can be very handy. And the book uses it for different things like determining how many minutes are in an hour or seconds in a minute. So remember that this is returning the remainder. And if there is no remainder, it'll return 0. Otherwise, it'll return how many digits are the remainder of the division. So that's Modulo, and that is the introduction of the JavaX Swing GUI library.